everyone. Welcome to the podcast. Today on the podcast, I have a very special guest. His name is Matt Kuhn, and he is a DVM PhD, and he works for government, and he's going to explain all that to us. And welcome to the podcast, Matt. I'm really happy to have you here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I've listened for a long time now, ever since I did the Power of 10 Leadership Academy with you at the MVMA.
I love that. Yeah,
and so I'm excited to finally be able to join you.
Cool. Thank you so much. I'm excited that you listen. Sometimes I wonder if anybody's out there, but I do appreciate the people that are listening to me. I really do. This is fun for me. So I'm really glad you wanted to come on the podcast. Yeah. So can you tell me and the audience, I know some about you, but can you tell us about yourself a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. So I grew up in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and after high school went to Michigan State for about the next 11 years. I kind of fell in love with it immediately. And so I started with a bachelor's degree there in animal science, and that's really where I fell in love with animals, and especially dairy cattle. And during that time, my undergrad, I thought I wanted to go into research, animal research. And so vet school was kind of in my head the logical track to go with. So after my bachelor's degree, I went to vet school right away. And pretty soon after starting vet school, also started a PhD because I wanted to go into research. So my PhD
That's pretty ambitious.
It was. It was a lot at the time, and it was a lot of kind of switching my brain back and forth between clinical medicine and research, because it is two very different ways to approach problems, some very technical, some very broad. But it was during that time that I also kind of realized I didn't want to go into research anymore. I hadn't fallen in love with it like I thought I had. And that was really what drove me towards non-clinical practice and really science policy. And so ever since early in vet school, early in my PhD, I've focused all of my extracurricular time really trying to learn about communication, learn about a lot of the soft skills, and apply my skills in veterinary medicine or public health and research to more of a science for policy career.
Okay.
So I finished my DVM in 2018, and shortly thereafter, this summer, I finished my PhD. And along that time, I had several different experiences outside of the clinic. I worked with DA, FDA, industry partners, non-governmental organizations, and got to really experience a lot of people that feed into the animal health industry that aren't necessarily all veterinarians themselves, and ended up with a science fellowship that I'm in now. So I'm a AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow down in Washington, D.C. And in this position, I support the Department of Defense with one of their publications of a peer-reviewed journal for DoD research.
So explain that to me.
Yeah, so
I don't know what all that means.
Right. So a lot of the research that happens at the Department of Defense is classified or controlled in some manner. So it's not publicly available, but we still want to both be able to support authors to make sure that they can have career advancement through publication, but also we want to make sure that all of the research that's being funded with taxpayer dollars is really seeing the light of the day as much as it can and supporting other research and can be built upon. So the Department of Defense created this internal journal that's available to those with the proper credentials, whether you're in the Department of Defense or associated with as a contractor or in academia. And so we publish our own journal, and it's peer reviewed, almost entirely internal, but it covers, it covers no veterinary medicine. So this is really an area where I've taken my skills that I've learned in vet school and my PhD, and now I'm applying them to a completely new field. So most of what the papers I'm reading and evaluating are about either space or cyber warfare or different kinds of physics or engineering type studies. So it's a lot of using the basics and the foundation of what I've learned in my education and applying it to very broad fields.
Because your PhD was in dairy, is that, or some kind of science?
Yeah.
Was it dairy science?
Exactly. So my PhD was in immunology with dairy cattle, and really focusing on kind of a single enzyme in dairy cattle at a very specific time of their life. So it was extremely focused on a very, very small detail of dairy cattle. And obviously it's not very broadly applicable when you study that tight, but you can use a lot of the skills you learned in developing your thesis and developing your projects and then apply those to other areas.
Okay. All right. So how did you get interested in, and how did you find out about the DOJ and getting into the government, and tell me that story?
Yeah, absolutely. It really all started very early in vet school. I did a fly-in event with the American Veterinary Medical Association. So these are events where they draw in folks from all over the US to DC, and the AVMA will educate you about what kind of bills are currently in Congress and could affect the veterinary industry. And then they have you go out and speak to your legislature. And that was kind of the first time I understood the impact that policy being made in DC can have such an impact on the entire industry, and really got me energized about this ability to use science to form policy. And I think we see that now more than ever in the need for it. But that's what really sparked my interest. And so after that, I came back to Michigan and I joined the Michigan Veterinary Medical Association's Legislative Advisory Committee. And that's where I really got involved with how, state policies can affect veterinary medicine, because we deal with just as many issues on the state level as the federal. And so things really took off from there. I started to get more involved outside of the legislative branch and seeing the executive branch, understanding how policies made at FDA or USDA can affect how we prescribe different pharmaceuticals, how animals are processed, how they're raised, and really just kept my interest growing. And eventually that led me to trying to get a foot in the door in DC, if you will. And so the Science and Technology Policy Fellowships with the American Association for the Advancement of Science, AAAS, STPF, was kind of my way to do that. And so
Like a lot of alphabet soup, right?
it is. That's acronyms are my life now down here. That's how we all live. It's unfortunate. But yeah, that's really how I got my foot in the door with science policy. And so now I'm looking to kind of grow my career into other areas.
And is that your goal, to stay in the government in DC and continue to work government? Or what is your ultimate idea about how this is all going to pan out after this fellowship?
Yeah, I'm trying to stay as open as I can. I've already seen how broadly I can apply my background. Obviously, I'm working in nothing close to veterinary medicine. Yeah, I'm comfortable in the position I'm in. So I'm open to seeing where things go. I definitely think in the future I'd like to return to the animal health industry a little bit, whether that's in government or industry. I'm open to either, but I think I'd like to get a little bit more closer to where I have my education. I'm comfortable with where I have a true passion for everything I'm doing. I don't think I'll be in DC forever, but there are certainly a lot of non-clinical positions in policy or other type non-clinical jobs everywhere around the US. So I don't see an issue in finding a position, hopefully back home in Michigan.
So did you ever have a desire to do clinical medicine at all? Or was it just kind of, once you found out that you could be non-clinical, that was your goal?
I don't think it's necessarily that I never had a desire to do it. I think, I would have enjoyed clinical medicine, but there was a lot of things that drew me away from it early on. And so I never really gave it a ton of thought or really considered it as a realistic path that I was going to place. Pretty early on in vet school, I decided I wasn't going to practice, and really focused a lot of my efforts on making sure I was learning how to apply a veterinary education to other fields.
Okay.
Especially a lot of, seeing a lot of veterinarians get burned out, seeing a lot of, the way researchers were getting burned out, that had a very significant impact on me early in vet school. And it made me question, is that the life that I wanted to live? Is that, what I wanted to go through? And a lot of times I saw veterinarians in other roles outside of practice, and they were, that's where I saw myself. That's where I saw being comfortable in the future, was in one of those other roles. And really the first step I saw that was I did an externship with Zoetis. and I saw how passionate everyone there was about their job, how they really felt like what they were doing was helping a large number of animals. Um, and that's what originally got me involved in research and wanted to go into a field or into research. And I didn't end up going that direction, but that was kind of the first thing that drew me away from clinical practice into a non-clinical setting.
And seeing just the opportunities that there are out there as
Yeah,
well.
I mean, it's amazing over the years since I've been exploring this career field, how many different jobs I've seen veterinarians take on. So in my fellowship class alone, so I'm in the Department of Defense. There are other veterinarians in Department of State, USDA, and USAID. Previous fellows have served in Congress and pretty much every other agency in the executive branch. Um, it's amazing how broadly you can apply the veterinary education and still be very successful and very valuable and desired across not only government, but industry as well.
And I found, I mean, I've always been in clinical practice, but I found a good outlet for this kind of maybe non-clinical bug that you get is being a part of the MVMA and the AVMA. And, I think that being part of organized medicine is an actual outlet that some people could pursue, because you did some of that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned I was on the legislative advisory committee with the
For the
MVMA, and I think
MVMA.
that's mostly practitioners that are on that and really guiding the policy, which is what we need. We need folks that are like you, that are in the field, understand exactly what's happening, know how interactions with clients are going, what issues clients are facing, what our practices are facing, and can guide policy. So I think that's very important. I've also been involved with AVMA in certain aspects at the kind of the more federal level, and working with their policy creation or just working with how they view policy. But to your point, the American Association of Bovine Practitioners, swine veterinarians. I know a lot of large animal groups more than the small,
Yeah.
but all of those groups are going to have committees that are going to tackle policy. They might not be a policy focused committee, but eventually most committees from associations are going to get involved in some way with policy. And I think a wonderful way that veterinarians can get involved if they have that itch they want to scratch, to have their voice heard, to make a meaningful impact on veterinarians and our industry across the US, across your state. I think it's a great way to get involved.
And the other thing that I found with that kind of involvement is it kind of changes things up a little bit and gets you more involved with the other professionals in your area. So when I first started in organized medicine, I did my local association, the Southeastern Michigan Veterinary Medical Association, and I kind of got involved with that. And then I moved on to the MVMA, and then there's, the AVMA and AHA. Like, you can do a lot on those committees. And I saw it as a way to not only broaden my own view of the profession and what can be done in the profession, even though it's not paying positions, but also as a way to meet other professionals. Like, I have so many longtime friends that I met on different committees and different organizations, and I wouldn't have met you if I wasn't doing the Power of 10. And so I really like to encourage veterinarians to step out of their practice, because I think that helps with mental health. I mean, what do you think about that? As far as, the stress and the stuff that we all feel is getting out of that little bubble.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. I think, there's a few aspects to this that are beneficial when you're networking with other people that are in your industry or very close by. One is that, you can kind of discuss with them the issues you have, and there's somebody you can vent to that really understands what you're going through. I think that's one of the things, a lot of people struggle with, is they don't know who to talk to, because you can talk to your spouse sometimes, or friends, but unless they're in the profession, they don't really understand what you're going through. They don't quite get it. So while they can sympathize, they might not be able to necessarily empathize. And the other is that it gives you a chance to see, what other folks are going through. Are other practitioners facing the same challenges? Have they found ways to cope with some challenges? Are there things you're doing that maybe are making life harder on yourself, and they have found ways to ease a burden or to get through something? And I think, the more you can grow your network and really try to learn from others and see how other people are tackling challenges is always going to be beneficial, and always going to help you to cope with the challenges you're dealing with.
Yeah, and I found even in those groups, ideas for the way you're practicing are helpful. You know, if you're a practice owner, you talk to other practice owners, other associates who will give you their feedback on their boss and might change the way you do your bossing, kind of thing. So I really do think that's important. Do you have an idea about the way practitioners are dealing with this whole COVID thing and this it's changed a lot in the way we're practicing. I'm sure it's changed a lot in the way you're working, even in your fellowship. Like, do you have any thoughts on that and how this is affecting us, and how we
Yeah,
can look at it?
I think one thing we're learning is the value of taking care of our employees. Um, so, for example, in a non-clinical role, I don't go into work at all, pretty much. I've been working from home since I started this position. I've been into work 3 days total.
Wow.
And I think one thing a lot of employers are learning is that people can be very successful from home in non-clinical roles, but we need to support them by, whether that's helping with their internet to speed it up, or a lot of physical means that come with that. But then I think we're also learning, for example, with practices, that we need to find other ways to help our employees that are coming into work still in these challenging times. So whether that's helping out with childcare, or making more flexible schedules. I think schedules especially are being highlighted as, people have to go into isolation. We have to make a lot of changes very quickly. I think we're learning to cope with being very fluid, supporting each other a lot more than we used to, and being much more understanding of everything, because we're kind of forced to understand that. We're having to make decisions now that are very beyond our control. But I think that's a good thing, and it's going to hopefully set a precedent for, there's more to life than work, and not just for ourselves, but for those that we work with, that we need to support that people have families, and they need to look out for their families or deal with the challenges their families are creating if they have kids at home that can't get to childcare. And I think it's bringing a lot of things to a head and to the light that we've been kind of talking about quiet for many years, but now has really come to the forefront, because we're being forced to address it. And so I think that's good. I think it's good for employers to understand the true needs of their employees, and start to develop strategies to deal with that now, that hopefully we can continue to implement into the future.
Yeah. And it's very isolating. I imagine for you, not being at work for almost a year now, right?
Yep. Yeah. It's been
And
all.
not seeing other than, I'm sure you do Zoom or some kind of meeting thing where you can see people on camera. But I find that the whole situation, and I'm sure this is true for people that do clinical work, it's still isolating. Even though you're going into work and you're seeing the individuals that you work with, you're mostly just going home. There's not a lot of socializing. There's not a lot of family gatherings. And I find that with the people that I'm coaching, it's adding to the stress because we have so much isolation. And I think what you say is true, that it is teaching us new ways to reach out and try to, connect with people in a different way, and be more understanding with the family issues and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I've definitely changed how I communicate with family and friends. It's a much more deliberate process of making sure that I'm staying in touch with people, because we don't see them as often. But also, I think I've taken that to my profession and my networking a little bit as well, because I know there are a lot of people that are somewhat isolated right now, or maybe looking for people to talk to, or just to make that human connection. And I found that with networking, it's actually been easier, I think, during the pandemic, to reach out to people, and grow a network, have informational interviews, things like that, because there are a lot of folks that are kind of clamoring to have some more human contact, that want to have conversations and be able to kind of talk shop like they haven't been able to at work. And so I don't want to say it's been a good thing, because it certainly hasn't, but it's opened up doors that weren't open before. People have been, from my view, much more willing to speak, especially via Zoom or phone call, than in years past.
Well, and different ways of thinking about it, different
Yes.
ways of thinking about your connections and where you're at. So if there's people out there that are have been in clinical medicine either for a short time or a long time, and they are wondering, what is out there for them non-clinically, and how would they go about pursuing something like that? I know with the boards it's pretty easy to get involved because they're all volunteers. So if you want to be on your local association board, if you want to be on your state association board, oftentimes it's just reaching out to, the CEO or the person that runs the organization and telling them you're interested in becoming a part of it. But what would you recommend that someone would do if they really were thinking about getting out of clinical and going into some sort of non-clinical situation?
Sure. So I think my first step would be to use the association resources at your disposal. So joining boards is one of the best steps you can take, but also, making your ambitions clear and known to different representatives on boards, and seeing who they can get you in contact with. So if you want to, talk to AVMA, talk to MVMA, talk to AABP, and tell them, I want to make this career transition. This is where I think I'd like to end up. Who could you put me in touch with that's in this field? I can guarantee that almost anybody at an association is going to be more than happy to give you 4 or 5 names of folks in that field that you can then get in touch with to help you with that career transition. I also spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, even though, not everyone loves social media, but you can do a lot of excellent searching to find where you want to be on LinkedIn. So, type in your desired field, and then maybe a company or an area that you'd like to be in, and just find some folks to reach out to and to start asking questions. Ask them, what do I need to do to transition? How could I better prepare for a transition? What kind of things should I learn about to be, to make myself a very good candidate for one of these jobs? To me, everything always comes back to the network and being able to rely on your network. So the more you can broaden your network, the more questions you can ask people, the more prepared you're going to be and more comfortable you're going to be to make that career transition. By making those connections, you also might open doors to the job you want. By telling someone, I want to transition to this field, they might say, we've been looking for this position to be filled for X amount of time. Why don't you come in and interview? You never know what kind of doors that might open.
And is there a space or a place where someone can go to see what if you don't know what's available? Is there like a place where you can go and say, okay, here's everything that's available for veterinarians in the field? I know that's kind of a broad question, but what if somebody just says, I want to get out of clinical medicine, but I have no idea what I want to do? Like, where would you think you would tell them to maybe start? Would it be to talking to somebody like you that's been through it, or?
I think there's 3 places I would start. So either with somebody like me, or that's been through it and been in non-clinical medicine and understands what jobs are there. Or you can reach out to the American Association of Industry Veterinarians. They're going to have a great grasp on what kind of jobs are available on the industry side of things. Or the American Association of Federal Veterinarians. I think it's Federal Veterinarians. And they're going to have a good grasp on the federal side of things. Now, there are obviously a lot of jobs in state or non-governmental organizations as well that might be a little harder to find. But if you can at least get your foot in the door with one of those 2 groups, they're going to be great resources to start putting you in the right direction of what might be available. So
I didn't even know those existed.
Yeah,
I didn't know those
amazing.
associations existed.
There are a lot of small groups out there that are very highly connected. If you can get an in with somebody in kind of the DC space here, if you're interested in moving down here, it's a very tight-knit group of veterinarians that work down here. We all know each other fairly well. if you're interested in science policy in general, there is a single resource or a very large document of all of the fellowships you can apply to for science policy. And I can share that. It has nothing to do with veterinary medicine, but it's a way to kind of at least see different ways across the country to get your foot in the door in science policy if you want to step out of the animal health realm for a little bit.
And is it something, if you wanted to get into something like you do, is it something that just somebody with a DVM could do, or do they need advanced degree like you have?
No, not at all. I think, or sorry, not at all that you need an advanced degree. I think a DVM is more than enough.
I mean, not that DVM isn't advanced.
No, yeah,
I didn't mean
yeah.
to insult anybody's DVM because I'm very proud of mine, but I don't have a PhD, so, you know.
No, yeah, absolutely. I think this year's fellowship class of the group I'm with, I'm the only one with an advanced degree or another advanced degree. I think
A second one, yeah.
Yeah, a couple might have masters in public health or something like that. But I know there are several that have a DVM alone and are doing excellent with it. And I don't think there's really a necessity to have any other kind of advanced degree. A DVM is more than enough training in epidemiology, public health. I think we take for granted how many communication skills come with a DVM, especially if you've been in practice.
Mm-hmm, for
Being
sure,
able to
yeah,
talk
it's
to
great.
clients and talk to other folks in your team, that is extremely valuable when you're in a government office that's interfacing with the public. To be able to have those communication skills, that's something that's very desired. So I don't think you need any advanced training. Certainly, if you want some, there's edX is a online class through several Ivy League schools. They offer online classes. There's Coursera. Kansas State offers a graduate certificate in regulatory medicine. So there's a lot of online courses you can take, several that are free. I try to take one every 6 months or so just to, learn about new fields. I think those are great ways to show that you're being proactive and try to learn something and get up to date on maybe what's happening in a different field. But by no means do you need to take anything like that or do anything extra.
Well, and that's something that if somebody thinks they might be interested, they could do in preparation, maybe, is take one class and see how they feel about it and, what they can learn and see if that's really that interesting before they give up their clinical job.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm seeing, especially since COVID, but probably even before, that our profession is getting to the point where we are struggling to keep enough people in clinical medicine. And so here we're talking about people getting out of clinical medicine. Do you see that as a future issue for our profession? Are we going to run out of people that want to work clinically and are going to go more into industry and the corporations, because there's so many corporate practice owning entities now that people can work for them? Do you see that as a potential problem ongoing for our profession?
Yeah, I think it speaks to the broader issue of, why we feel the need to leave clinical medicine, obviously. I think it's going to help that we have more vet schools coming on board. They're going to help with the kind of dearth of veterinarians right now that want to be in practice. So that should help. I think right now we definitely see the issue of less people being in the industry, but I think there's several reasons for that. One is we still don't do a great job of supporting people that start families and keeping them in practice, especially with the gender divide we have in our industry. I think we need to do a much better job of ensuring those that start a family will either continue working or come back to work and don't leave the profession once they do so. And I think we need to take a much more serious look at why people don't want to be in clinical medicine. I think we know why, but is everyone, especially practice owners and the industry itself, are they taking enough steps to try to stop that? I don't know. I think there are some of the kind of conglomerates that are doing a better job than others in supporting their veterinarians and trying to prevent burnout. But I think that's something that eventually either everyone is going to have to face or take a proactive step towards, because like you said, we are going to start seeing more and more restrictions or availability of veterinarians, and that's going to become a bigger issue if we don't address it sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and being in clinical practice since the beginning of COVID, the demand has gotten so high for us. And I talked to some veterinarians just recently that I'm going to have on the podcast about just the sheer volume of clients that want to get seen, and there just isn't the space. And so then, working the veterinarians in the clinics harder and longer, and it something has to give at some point. And I'm afraid it's going to be our profession. I hope that it doesn't collapse in and on itself. But that's one of the reasons I do what I do, is I want to encourage people to stay in veterinary medicine in whatever capacity, whether it's non-clinical or clinical, but just keep people in this profession, because it is such a diverse, a diverse profession. There's so many things that we can do with it.
And I think this is an area where policy can also step in a little bit. We've seen at AVMA discussions around telemedicine quite a bit. And love it or hate it, I think telemedicine is going to come to the forefront more and more. And it could be a very good solution to a lot of our problems. There are obviously issues associated with it, but having the discussion about it and how we can apply it to veterinary medicine, I think, is one of the ways we can potentially reduce the burden on some of our clinics, and help some veterinarians find a career where they're not necessarily in a clinic, but still able to practice medicine in some way. So I think there are policy changes we can make and approach on both the state and federal level to help with this.
Yeah, I agree. We've done a little bit of telemedicine in my own practice, and it is a little challenging, but it is a good solution in some instances, because especially with COVID, we've had clients that can't leave their homes and they still have pets with problems. And, it's been a little challenging with older people sometimes to try to get them to use the phone properly so they can show you things. And, can you show me the ear? And,
right.
They're trying to steer the phone. But so that's been entertaining. But I really do think that on some level that is a great solution. And I hope that the associations and the government and everything will kind of back that development, that actually not try to squash it, and regulate us out of it. So what else would you like to say to people that listen to this podcast that are either clinical or non-clinical, but in this profession, and what else would you like to give them as far as advice, or tell them about what it is that you do to help broaden their knowledge and broaden mine, because I don't know exactly about it all either.
Yeah, I think the thing that I've always, and this is something I've always kind of thought about a lot since vet school, is I think we take too much pride in making our lives difficult. I saw it in vet school, everyone, you talk about how hard you worked the night before, how long you stayed up, how long it's been since you've had a great meal or this or that. And it almost, people took pride in it.
Yeah, like a badge of courage, right?
Right, exactly. There's nothing wrong with hard work. Absolutely not. Obviously, all of us work extremely hard, and we should.
Right.
But I think we need to change the norms of how we talk to each other and how we gloat to, I took this time off for myself, or I took this time off to be with my family. And we need to normalize not working hard sometimes. I see it a lot on the kind of online forums of when clients reach out to us at the 11th hour, or on weekends, how do we serve them? And there's always a debate of, you should always go the extra mile for a client versus no, that's your time, you're off the clock, you need to be done. And I think it's something that's changing over time, but we need to make sure we're prioritizing ourselves when it comes to things like that. Yes, we might lose a client, but in the long run, if we're not taking care of ourselves, if we're not taking care of our practice staff, we're not taking care of our relationship with our family, then the clients are going to suffer anyways.
Right.
And so I think it's something we need to normalize, taking care of ourselves, talking about it, and that not everything is about the business right now. Maybe it's about the business in the long run, but we should consider what really goes into the long run business then, if we want to have that conversation. And a lot of times that starts with mental health, family, taking care of yourself, and if that means, stepping away from clinical practice for a little bit, maybe that's a good idea. It doesn't have to leave forever. I've seen several veterinarians who will, go from clinical practice to a more either regulatory or clinical research field for a few years and then come back because they missed it. And that's fine if that's what it takes, to kind of reset for a little bit. I think that's fantastic. You just had a chance where you can kind of pull back, reset, get back to where you love medicine again, and then get back in. I think that's a wonderful way to go about things.
Well, and I, in my career, because I did do clinical medicine and I did buy my own practice and I was the owner, I did that specifically so I could call my own shots because I knew I wanted to have a family and children. And I was like, okay, if I'm the owner, I can close the place if I need to. I can leave early. Nobody can tell me I can't. And speaking from somebody who's got grown children and went through that, it flies by.
Yeah.
You will, if you allow yourself to miss out on those few short years, it's like 18 years you raise your kids, right? If you allow yourself to miss out on the school plays and my kids were musical, so the concerts and all of that, the sporting events, then you're not going to get that back.
Yeah.
And you can always work, like there is always plenty of work to do. And I don't know why, as a younger veterinarian, I had that kind of that motivation to decide on purpose that I wasn't going to miss things out with my kids. Like I wasn't going to miss out on family events. I wasn't going to miss out on school events. And my kids might tell you differently because they had to go to latchkey and, daycare in the summer. So they'll tell you how they suffered because mom worked. But I literally didn't miss much, because I decided that on purpose. And now that I'm, they're grown, I'm so happy that I didn't. And so I always encourage younger people that want to have a family to really decide on purpose that that's what you're going to do. And, work hard when you can, and then take your time off when you can, and do the vacations and do the school events and be the copy mom, on your day off, because that's what I did. And, just be involved. And I think whether you're clinical or non-clinical, that's something that you have to purposefully decide and do. And if you're in a practice where you have a boss that doesn't allow that, then you need to find another place to work.
Yeah, I think it's important to know your worth. And like you said earlier, to know that there's a need for veterinarians in both clinical and non-clinical practice around the country right now. So you're an asset.
Yeah.
Whether it's the role you're in now or the role you're looking to next, know what you're worth, not just money wise, but ask for enough time off, ask for the benefits that you need, whatever it's going to take to be supportive of your family. Make sure that when you're having those conversations early in the kind of employment process, that you're thinking ahead of what it's going to take to make sure you can take care of yourself and your family for the next 1, 5, 10 years.
Yeah. And don't indulge in the guilt, that you have to leave a client because your kids are more important, or your husband or your spouse, or, don't allow that guilt to be part of your thoughts, even though you're going to feel it. You got to be able to process it and let it go, because the guilt is what sometimes makes us spend more time at work than we do with our family. And that's not something that is going to be something you're going to be happy about when your kids are grown or whatever. So is there anything else that we didn't talk about what you're doing now, or something that you think might be interesting that we didn't talk about? I wrote down a few questions, but I think we covered a lot of it.
I don't think I have anything else necessarily.
Yeah. Because I think working in outside of clinical medicine, I think part of your focus is the work-life balance.
Yeah.
But we can have that in or out of the profession. But I really think you talking about the different options for people non-clinically is something that isn't always taught to us in vet school. Like,
Yeah,
did you think that wasn't covered for us?
I think we had speakers maybe in lunch seminars come and talk about some of the roles that veterinarians could, take on, especially when I remember we were talked to by folks in the military quite a bit about the roles that veterinarians played in different military applications. But aside from that, I don't think we saw too many outside of that or CDC maybe. But I think, non-clinical medicine, especially for me, I think you do see a much better work-life balance, which is kind of very generalized, but kind of very broadly speaking, I think because it's, hours are much more regular, typically if you're not necessarily in the research field. And because you're working for larger corporations many times with the government, they're focused on helping you to take care of your family. In the position I'm in, I work 40 hours a week, which means I get every other Friday off with the way I structure things. I get, in my opinion, plenty of vacation time, lots of holidays off. So it works very well for me. And that's something that a lot of clinics might not be able to offer. Same thing that goes with benefits of working for a larger company. You get a lot of benefits that go along with it that some clinics might not be able to offer. That's very, again, broadly speaking. It's also very less physical, which I know for some people can become an issue, especially later in a career.
Yeah. Right now it's very physical in the clinic because we don't have
Right.
clients to help us hold on to their crazy animals. And so it is more physical.
And especially, we
large
see it in
animal.
small animal and especially large animal, as that can cause a lot of problems. I know a lot of younger vets that are facing shoulder issues, in dairy medicine and have to leave practice because they've gotten to the point they can no longer even practice. So I think it's just an option to solve some different problems. Not everything is great in non-clinical medicine, obviously, but there are positions out there that can solve certain problems depending on what your needs are. And I think it's something people should just keep in mind.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I really appreciate you being on the podcast. It was really fun talking to you. I'm still very fascinated about exactly what you're doing. Can you tell me, like, on a day-to-day, like, if you can, kind of what's your day? Like, that's what I'm wondering is, what is your day like?
Sure. So my day is essentially I wake up and I answer emails for about an hour, half an hour maybe, kind of whatever the thread was from the day before, and continue that going with my team. We can't video conference because of some of the restrictions on our computers, so we do a lot by email.
Because of security.
Yep, because of security, we can't video conference. We can call, but we don't typically do large calls. And so we email most of the time, so we spend a lot of time on email. Typically, once or twice a week, we'll get a paper will come in as a submission to the journal. And so I'll review it. I'll fill out a form that kind of discusses its technical qualities, if it's up to merit to receive peer review. So I'll go through those one every couple of days. And then talk to authors about, yes, your paper was great, we'll pass on to peer reviewers, or no, here are the things we should discuss and we can work on together to try to get it up to snuff, so that it's ready to move on and keep going, whether that is grammar or the technical quality, or if they need to redo some experiments to kind of make it correct, if you want to say that, or good enough. And then a lot of my job is also outreach. So because we're only publishing controlled unclassified and classified research, it's difficult to know who is conducting that kind of research. It's not a database or a list of who's doing classified research, obviously. So a lot of my day is kind of going through different labs throughout the Air Force, Army, Navy, and all their research groups, and just kind of cold emailing people or calling different researchers and saying, hey, if you do this kind of work, we'd love for you to come submit to us or peer review for us. how can we help you to increase your publications? And we also do a lot of other work as part of my, we call it the Defense Technical Information Center. We take in a lot of technical reports. We're kind of a Wikipedia, if you will, or a PubMed for inside the DoD. So it's a lot of outreach, working with authors, working with researchers to make sure that, their research is getting the kind of eyes on it that it deserves. And that also that they can find the kind of information they need to support their research.
That's really interesting. See, I never knew.
Yeah.
I never knew you were out there doing that kind of thing. Well, that's amazing. All right. Well, I thank you so much for being on the podcast. It was really fun learning about what you do. And if somebody's out there and this has sparked their interest in non-clinical medicine, are you somebody that would be willing to, email with them to get a little more information on what you're doing and where they can turn for advice and help in pursuing that kind of career?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on LinkedIn, I think just Matt Kuhn, or you can email me directly. My email is Matt Kuhn, Kuhn. So mattkuhndvm@gmail.com. So yeah, feel free to email me, find me on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter, actively follow all of them, and happy to chat with anyone.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, it was so nice speaking to you today. Thanks for being on the podcast. I really appreciate you. Not really volunteering, but agreeing.
Yeah, thank you so much for
talk to
having
me
me.
today. It was really fun. Yeah, I
Yeah.
enjoyed it a lot. All right. Well, everybody have a good week out there, and I'll talk to you again next week. Thanks, Matt.